They mocked his slow Southern drawl. 2 hours later, all of Washington fell silent. This simple country lawyer had just done something no one expected. With 47 years of buried secrets, the moment at the 38-minute mark will change everything you thought you knew about American politics. Even CNN had to admit they were wrong. Senator Kennedy, your folksy demeanor cannot hide the fact that you are nothing but an ignorant Southern puppet pretending to understand the law. You are a disgrace to the Senate. Adam Schiff's voice dripped with coastal condescension as he scanned the room, clearly waiting for applause. Senator John Kennedy slowly removed his glasses, wiped them with a frayed old handkerchief, and looked up with the patient expression of a professor about to correct a particularly misguided student. Well, Representative Schiff, he began, his Louisiana drawl intentionally thickened. My mama taught me that when someone calls you ignorant, you ought to educate them. And since you seem so concerned about my competence, I think it's only fair that I share my concerns about you. Today's lesson is on the difference between a Harvard Law degree and Harvard-level ethics. Class is in session, and unlike your campaign donors, tuition is free. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed. What was supposed to be a routine joint hearing on intelligence community reforms had turned into a gladiatorial arena. Rumors had been swirling around Capitol Hill that Adam Schiff planned to destroy Senator John Kennedy, the Louisiana Republican known for his unassuming manner and witty quips. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Schiff arrived with an entourage, 3 lawyers, 5 staffers, and 2 meticulously organized boxes of documents. His Armani suit was perfectly pressed, his California tan glowing under the lights. He moved with the confidence of a prosecutor who had never lost a case he had rigged. Senator Kennedy arrived alone, carrying a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had barely survived Hurricane Katrina. His suit was decent but unremarkable, his white hair slightly ruffled. To the casual observer, he looked like somebody's grandfather who had wandered into the wrong building. The liberal media filled the press box, smartphones ready to record what they expected would be the humiliation of yet another backwoods Southern Republican. The CNN churns were practically already written. Schiff schools Southern Senator on intelligence matters. Schiff opened with his signature arrogance, his voice dripping with coastal condescension. Senator Kennedy, he began, placing an emphasis on the title that implied it was undeserved. Your voting record shows consistent opposition to intelligence community reforms. You have called dedicated public servants deep state operatives. You have supported a president who attacks our institutions. Frankly, your backwoods Southern politics have no place in serious discussions about national security. Kennedy listened quietly, occasionally wiping his glasses with a worn handkerchief. Schiff grew louder with each word. Perhaps if you spent less time coming up with folksy catchphrases and more time actually reading the intelligence reports, assuming you could even understand them, then you would realize. People made fun of his slow Southern accent. 2 hours later, an eerie silence fell over all of Washington. This humble country lawyer had just pulled off something absolutely unexpected. With 47 years of buried secrets, the moment at minute 38 will change everything you thought you knew about American politics. Even CNN had to admit they were completely wrong. Senator Kennedy, your folksy act doesn't hide that you're just an ignorant Southern puppet pretending to understand the law. You're an embarrassment to the Senate. Adam Schiff's voice oozed with coastal condescension as he scanned the hearing room, clearly expecting a round of applause. Senator John Kennedy slowly took off his glasses, cleaned them with a well-used handkerchief, then looked up with the patient face of a professor about to set a very confused student straight. Well, Congressman Schiff, he started, his Louisiana accent deliberately getting thicker. My mama always taught me that if someone calls you ignorant, you ought to educate them. And since you seem so worried about my qualifications, I figure it's only fair I share some concerns about yours. Today's lesson is all about the difference between a Harvard Law degree and Harvard-level ethics. Class is in session, and unlike your campaign donors, tuition for this one is free. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed, completely overflowing with people. What was meant to be a simple joint hearing on reforming the intelligence community had suddenly turned into a full-blown gladiatorial arena. Rumors had flown through the Capitol that Adam Schiff was planning to absolutely dismantle Senator John Kennedy, the Louisiana Republican famous for his down-home manner and vivid expressions. The difference between them couldn't have been more obvious. Schiff showed up with a whole entourage. He had 3 lawyers, 5 staffers, and 2 entire boxes filled with perfectly organized documents. His Armani suit was flawlessly pressed, and his California tan practically glowed under the lights. He carried himself with the supreme confidence of a prosecutor who never lost a single case he'd managed to manipulate. Senator Kennedy arrived all by himself, carrying a single, beat-up leather briefcase that looked like it had weathered Hurricane Katrina itself. His suit was fine, but nothing special, and his white hair was a little messy. To anyone just glancing, he looked like somebody's grandpa who had somehow gotten lost in the wrong building. The liberal media crowded the press section, phones ready to record what they fully expected to be the total humiliation of yet another old-fashioned Southern Republican. CNN's on-screen caption was already prepped. Schiff schools Southern senator on intelligence matters. Schiff began with his usual arrogance, his voice oozing that familiar coastal condescension. Senator Kennedy, he started, emphasizing the title as if to imply it wasn't deserved. Your voting record clearly shows consistent opposition to any intelligence community reforms. You've gone so far as to call dedicated public servants deep state operatives. You've supported a president who openly attacked our institutions. Frankly, your old-fashioned Southern politics have absolutely no place in serious discussions about national security. Kennedy listened silently, every now and then cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief that looked like it had seen better days. Schiff kept going, getting bolder with every single word. Maybe if you spent less time dreaming up country sayings and more time actually reading intelligence reports, assuming, of course, you can even understand them, you'd grasp just how out of your league you really are. A few Democrats let out chuckles, and the media furiously typed away. And that accent, Schiff added, a smirk playing on his lips. Perhaps you could try speaking a little faster. Some of us actually have work to get done today. Kennedy finally looked up, a faint smile touching his lips. He leaned closer to the microphone, his Southern accent even more pronounced than usual. Well, now, Congressman Schiff, I sure do appreciate your concern about how fast I talk. I may sound like Foghorn Leghorn, but at least I don't lie like Pinocchio. The room buzzed. A few people laughed out loud. Schiff's face reddened just a bit. You see, Kennedy went on, where I'm from, we got a saying, don't start none, won't be none. But since you brought up my education, I guess I ought to mention that I did manage to somehow get through Vanderbilt University, the University of Virginia Law School, and what was that other place? Oh yeah, Oxford University. As in England, as in Rhodes Scholar. The laughter immediately died down. Schiff blinked quickly, several times. Kennedy reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound document. Actually, I've been doing a little reading myself. This here is your Harvard Law thesis, Congressman. Prosecutorial Ethics in the Modern Justice System. Fascinating stuff, really. Page 47 is especially interesting. He adjusted his glasses and started reading aloud. A prosecutor who manipulates evidence or misleads the court betrays not just his office, but the very foundation of justice itself. Your words, Congressman. Shall we talk about how well you've actually lived up to them? Schiff's confident smirk completely vanished. Now, you mentioned that I don't understand complex legal matters, Kennedy went on. So, let me just see if I can try to struggle through this. You also challenged my understanding of California law. Well, let's just see. Now, California Evidence Code Section 1040, subsection B, actually says that public entities can refuse to share official information if it goes against the public interest. And you, sir, broke that rule precisely 17 times during your time on the Intelligence Committee. He then reeled off each date and every specific violation, all from memory, without his Southern drawl ever faltering. But I'm just a simple country lawyer, Kennedy added, with a touch of theatrical modesty. What could I possibly know about the law codes of all 50 states, which I just happened to memorize for fun? The entire press section had fallen absolutely silent. This certainly wasn't the takedown they'd been expecting, and definitely not in the way they thought it would go down. Schiff tried to regain his composure. Memorizing statutes doesn't make you qualified to discuss intelligence matters. Speaking of intelligence, Kennedy gently interjected, opening his briefcase once more. I brought some homework with me. 23 folders, to be exact. Every single one documenting what my grandpappy would lovingly refer to as shenanigans from your career. He carefully pulled out folder after folder, arranging them in a neat stack right there on the desk. Each folder displayed a label, perfectly clear for the cameras to see. Labels like Russia hoax, whistleblower coordination, illegal leaks, China connections, Ed Buck scandal, and several others were all visible. Now, Congressman Schiff, Kennedy said, his voice taking on a prosecutorial edge, yet his drawl remained. You called me ignorant, backwards, and even embarrassing. My mama always taught me that when folks insult you like that, they're usually just describing themselves. So let's just test that theory, shall we? Schiff's team of lawyers immediately began whispering urgently to one another. This was absolutely not going according to their plan. But first, Kennedy added, pulling out his phone, I want to show you something really interesting. You see, while you were busy insulting my intelligence, the good folks back home in Louisiana were watching, and oh boy, they have some thoughts. He then held his phone screen up for all the cameras to capture. His Twitter mentions were absolutely exploding with support, while Schiff's were quickly filling with questions about the contents of those folders. Seems like those backward folks understand something you don't, Congressman. They can smell what my cousin Budrow calls a possum in the woodpile from a mile away. And sir, with all due respect, you're stinking up the whole forest. The committee chairman, a Democrat who had fully expected this to be a simple embarrassment for a Republican senator, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Gentlemen, perhaps we should really try to focus on the agenda here. Oh, I'm happy to focus on intelligence reform, Kennedy said. He corrected them cheerfully. Starting with reforming the intelligence of certain committee members who wouldn't recognize the truth if it bit them on their Harvard-educated posterior. Even some of the Democrats present couldn't help but crack a smile at that remark. So what'll it be, Congressman? Kennedy asked, gesturing toward his towering stack of folders. Do you want to keep talking about how ignorant I am, or would you like to discuss your career? Because I've got all day, and unlike some folks, I tell the truth even when I'm talking slow. Schiff's face had visibly drained, going from fiery red to a stark pale. His chief lawyer immediately leaned over and whispered something urgent into his ear. Let's start with Russia, shall we? Kennedy suggested, reaching for the very first folder. Because that, sir, is where your problems truly began. Well, actually, they probably started back in law school when you apparently decided to skip all the ethics classes. But Russia is certainly where they became public. He opened the folder with the deliberate, almost ceremonial care of a man unwrapping a Christmas present he'd been saving for months. This is gonna be more fun than a crawfish boil in July, Kennedy muttered, just loud enough for the sensitive microphones to catch every word. The hunter had become the hunted, and the slow-talking Southern senator was about to show everyone exactly why you should never, ever judge a book by its accent. Now, Congressman Schiff, Kennedy began opening that first folder with a truly theatrical deliberation. Let's talk about your famous quote. The one where you claimed you had more than just circumstantial evidence of Russian collusion. That was quite a claim indeed. It was like my Uncle Beauregard claiming he caught a catfish the size of a jumboat. He then pulled out a meticulously organized timeline chart. The big difference is, Uncle Beauregard actually had a picture. You, sir, had nothing but hot air and a very willing media. By my count, and I'm just a simple country lawyer who can count, mind you. You lied to the American people about Russian collusion exactly 237 times. I know that because I counted each one twice myself. And I had my staff verify it 3 times, just to be sure. Schiff visibly straightened up in his chair. I always maintained that we had evidence. Oh, that's interesting, Kennedy said. He interrupted, reaching for a small digital recorder. Because I have right here a recording from a closed session of your committee, dated March 17, 2019. Would you like me to play it for everyone? Schiff's lawyers immediately huddled even closer together. One of them whispered something urgently. That's classified, the lawyer hissed. Was classified? Kennedy asked. He corrected them cheerfully. It was declassified last month. Funny how the truth always seems to find its way into the daylight eventually. With that, he pressed play. And then, Schiff's voice filled the entire room. We don't have direct evidence yet, but I'm confident we'll find it if we keep looking. Yet that very night, Kennedy continued, stopping the recording. You went on CNN and told Anderson Cooper you had smoking gun evidence. That's like saying you've got gumbo when all you have is an empty pot and some wishful thinking. The press section was furiously taking notes, but their expressions had definitely changed. This wasn't the story they'd actually come to cover. But wait, there's more, Kennedy said, channeling his best infomercial voice. Let me ask you something, Congressman. Did you know Dmitry Vilov, considering Schiff's face just went from pale to gray? I don't recall. Let me refresh your memory, Kennedy offered helpfully. Harvard Law School, class of 1985. Your roommate for 2 years. Son of a Russian diplomat. Interesting fellow. Currently works for a Russian state energy company. You projected your own Russian connections onto President Trump like an IMAX theater projecting a movie. He pulled out a photo of young Schiff and Volkov at Harvard, arms around each other's shoulder, smiling at the camera. In Louisiana, we call that psychological projection. It's like a thief thinking everyone else is stealing. Schiff tried to rally. That meeting with the committee was classified. You just admitted to what? Kennedy asked innocently, playing a declassified recording. But speaking of classified information, didn't you discuss that same classified meeting on CNN that very night? Let me see here. He pulled out a tablet and played a CNN clip from the same date. There was Schiff telling Anderson Cooper details from the supposedly classified meeting. Your memory is shorter than a politician's promise at election time, Kennedy observed. Or maybe you just figured rules don't apply to you. Like my Mim used to say, rules are for thee, not for me. Except she was describing hypocrites, not endorsing the practice. The comparison between the Nunes memo and the Schiff memo was even more devastating. Kennedy laid out both documents side by side on the desk, using a ruler to point at specific sections like a teacher with a particularly slow student. Now, the Nunes memo said the FISA warrant was based on the unverified Steele dossier. You called that a lie. Turns out, it was verified. Nunes said the FBI didn't tell the FISA court who paid for the dossier. You said that was false. Turns out, it was true as gospel. Everything in the Nunes memo? Verified. Everything in your memo? Debunked like a Bigfoot sighting. He looked up at Schiff with exaggerated sympathy. Martin, you're batting a Rosen while calling yourself an all-star. That's like my cousin Thibodeau claiming he's a NASCAR driver because he once drove fast to the Piggly Wiggly. A Republican senator couldn't suppress a laugh. Even some Democrats were struggling to maintain their composure. But here's my favorite part. Kennedy continued, warming to his theme. You spent 3 years claiming you had evidence. My Mima used to say, the rooster that crows loudest laid the fewest eggs. You crowed about Russia from every rooftop in Washington, every TV studio in New York, every podcast in California. He paused for effect, then delivered the killing blow. But your nest is emptier than a politician's promises. You didn't have evidence. You had hopes, dreams, and a willing media. That's not investigation, Congressman. That's fiction writing, and not even good fiction. Stephen King writes better fiction, and his monsters are more believable than your evidence. Schiff's lead attorney stood up. Mr. Chairman, I object to the characterization. Sit down, counselor, Kennedy said gently. This isn't a court, and your client isn't under oath. Though, given his relationship with the truth, that might not matter much anyway. He closed the Russia folder with a satisfied snap. You know what the real tragedy is, Congressman? While you were chasing phantoms and pursuing your Russia fantasies, real threats to America went uninvestigated. Real corruption went unpunished. All because you were too busy playing Captain Ahab to your white whale of Russian collusion. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, studying Schiff like an entomologist examining a particularly interesting specimen of bug. But don't worry, we're just getting started. Like my grandpappy used to say, when you're draining the swamp, you find the biggest gators at the bottom. And sir, we're about to go deep-sea diving in your career. He reached for the next folder labeled Whistleblower Scandal, in large, bold letters. Now, this one here is particularly interesting because this is where you went from being wrong to being corrupt. It's like the difference between stepping in a puddle and jumping in the swamp with both feet. Schiff was sweating now, despite the air conditioning. His team of lawyers looked like they were reconsidering their life choices. Shall we continue your education, Congressman? Kennedy asked sweetly. After all, you were worried about my ignorance. I'm just trying to clear things up. Consider this a free seminar in ethics. I know Harvard probably charged you a fortune, but it seems they offered refunds for that particular class. Now let's talk about your little whistleblower, my friend. Kennedy started opening the second folder, handling it with the careful precision of a surgeon about to operate. You know, the one you definitely never met, never coordinated with, and certainly never coached, right? Yes, that whistleblower. He pulled out a really detailed timeline, something that looked like it belonged on a murder mystery board. August 12, 2019. Your staff meets with the whistleblower. August 12, 2019. The exact same day. The whistleblower files a complaint. Now, I'm not much of a betting man myself, but those odds are certainly longer than my Aunt Gertrude's grocery list. Schiff shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There was no coordination. Hold on a minute, Kennedy interrupted, pulling out his phone. I'm about to do something that might seem a little out of the ordinary. I'm going to text the whistleblower right now. Let's just see. Hey, remember those meetings with Schiff's staff? The hearing room went completely silent. Kennedy's phone buzzed almost instantly. Well, would you look at that? Kennedy said, holding the screen up for the cameras. The response says, which time? Looks like your whistleblower friend has a slightly different recollection than you do, Congressman. Schiff's face went from pale gray to a sickly green. His lawyers were frantically whispering to each other. But wait, it gets even better, Kennedy announced, pulling out a photograph. This right here is from Chez Lauren in Georgetown. A fancy place. $200 steaks. And look who's having dinner together on August 5th, just 1 week before that complaint was filed. The photo clearly showed Schiff dining with a younger man, both leaning in close, almost conspiratorially, over their meals. You coached the witness, and then acted more surprised than a raccoon who just got the lid slammed shut on his garbage can. That's like a fireman who starts fires himself, just so he can put them out and play the hero. Kennedy then pulled out a transcript, handling it just like it was key evidence in a courtroom. But the real masterpiece, the real gem, was your parody of President Trump's phone call. Allow me to refresh everyone's memory for a moment. He played audio of Schiff's infamous parody, reading his dramatic interpretation of Trump's call, which bore absolutely no resemblance to reality. Now let's compare that to the actual transcript, Kennedy said, pulling out the real document. He read sections side by side, and the contrast was absolutely devastating. You lied on national television, you made up quotes, and you created dialogue that simply never existed. In Louisiana, we call that fraud. In California, apparently you just call it parody. Like calling a bank robbery an unauthorized withdrawal. The press section was in total overdrive now. Cameras were clicking, keyboards were clacking. This was definitely not the narrative they had expected. But here's where things get really interesting. Kennedy's drawl became even more pronounced as he warmed up to his subject. You had 17 witness testimonies, all of which contradicted your narrative. 17? That's more hidden than my Uncle Claude's moonshine stash. He began reading excerpts from those hidden testimonies, and each one absolutely demolished Schiff's carefully constructed narrative. Ambassador Volker, I saw no evidence of collusion. Tim Morrison, I saw nothing illegal in the call. Kurt Volker, there was no quid pro quo. You hid evidence like a squirrel hides nuts, except squirrels do it for survival. You did it for political gain. Kennedy then produced a model of the Capitol building, placing it on the desk with a bit of theatrical flair. And let's talk about your basement bunker. You held secret hearings in the basement, like some kind of Batman villain, except Batman actually fights for justice. You, sir, were fighting due process. He pointed to the basement with a pointer he had pulled from seemingly nowhere. Republicans denied entry. Witnesses coached in secret. Selective leaks to friendly media. You turned the United States Capitol into your own personal star chamber. King George himself would have been proud. The Founding Fathers? They're spinning in their graves fast enough to power the entire eastern seaboard. A young Republican congressman simply couldn't contain himself. That's exactly what happened. They locked us out. Order, the chairman said weakly, but his heart just wasn't in it. The damage was already being done. Kennedy pulled out one more document from that whistleblower folder. And here's my favorite part. This is an email from your staff, directly to the whistleblower. The subject line? Suggested revisions to your complaint. You edited his homework like a teacher with a red pen. Then you had the audacity to act surprised when the very homework you helped write showed up on your desk. He shook his head sadly. That's like being shocked to find gambling in a casino. My departed Mima, my grandmother, had a saying. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. You put lipstick, mascara, and a whole beauty salon treatment on this pig of a scandal, but it's still going to wink. Schiff attempted one last defense. The president was threatening national security. Kennedy interrupted, stating the only real threat to national security was a congressman who believed the rules didn't apply to him. He accused them of weaponizing the Intelligence Committee, transforming oversight into an attempted overthrow, and making a complete joke of due process. Kennedy shut the whistleblower folder with a definitive snap. You know what really gets me? He asked. You're a former prosecutor. You should absolutely know better. It's like a doctor, after taking the Hippocratic Oath, deciding to poison patients. You didn't just betray your position. You betrayed your training, your ethics, and most importantly, the American people who had placed their trust in you to be fair. Kennedy slowly took out a handkerchief and meticulously cleaned his glasses once more. But I'm just a simple country lawyer, he drawled. What could I possibly know about complex matters like telling America the truth and actually following the law? Those must be advanced concepts they simply don't teach in the backwoods of Louisiana. The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ready for folder number 3? He questioned. Congressman, or do you perhaps need a little break to dream up some fresh excuses? Because I've got to tell you, the ones you're currently using are even weaker than gas station coffee. Are you prepared for folder number 3, Congressman? Or do you require a quick recess to come up with some better justifications? Because I'm telling you, your excuses right now are about as weak as yesterday's coffee from a convenience store. Now, before we delve into this next folder, Kennedy began, theatrically adjusting his eyewear. There's something crucial I need to establish. You and Congressman Eric Swalwell, both California Democrats, both serving on the Intelligence Committee, you're practically two peas in a pod, except Eric got honeypot by a Chinese spy. And you, well, you just got money-potted. He opened the folder marked Chinese connections with the careful respect one might show historical documents. Let's begin with your donor list, Kennedy suggested. It's astonishing how many of your contributors have direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party. It's practically a who's who of Beijing's influence operations. Kennedy pulled out a complicated financial chart that sprawled across the table like a tangled spiderweb. James Chong donated $50,000 to your campaigns, he stated. He also happens to be on the board of 3 companies directly owned by the Chinese government. Linda Wu, 75,000 in donations. Her husband runs the U.S. branch of the China Construction Bank. Should I continue? Schiff's attorneys were furiously scribbling notes, struggling to keep up. But here's where it truly gets interesting, Kennedy announced, leaning forward conspiratorially. Then, without any prior warning, he spoke in flawless Mandarin Chinese. Huh! Gian, can you understand what I'm saying, Congressman? The room instantly fell into an absolute silence. Everyone stared intently at Schiff, who had involuntarily started to respond in Mandarin before abruptly catching himself. His mouth was half open, frozen in sheer horror at his mistake. Interesting language skills you have there, Congressman, Kennedy observed, smoothly switching back to English, his signature drawl still present. Exactly where did you learn Mandarin? And why did you seem to comprehend my question about your Chinese handlers? The press section erupted into a frenzy of activity. This was undeniably the moment that would dominate every news broadcast. But wait, it gets even better, Kennedy announced, pulling out his phone. Let's see what Chinese state media is reporting right now. Oh, would you look at that, an article published in the People's Daily, just 47 minutes ago, right in the middle of this hearing. He read directly from his phone. Congressman Schiff defends China's interests against racist attacks. They're watching and cheering you on in real time, Kennedy elaborated. You're their MVP, their most valuable puppet. Kennedy then presented bank records that painted an undeniably damning picture. Every single time you voted against sanctions on China, there was a deposit. Every time you killed legislation critical of Beijing, another deposit appeared. Every time you publicly defended Chinese trade practices, a deposit materialized. You're more reliable than a Swiss watch, Kennedy quipped. That is, if Swiss watches were entirely owned by the Chinese Communist Party. He displayed a timeline clearly showing Schiff's votes and their corresponding bank deposits. March 2019, a vote against the Uyghur Sanctions Bill, Kennedy began. March 20th, $25,000 deposited into your wife's consulting firm. June 20th, Nannan, killing Taiwan defense legislation in committee. June 15th, $40,000 in speaking fees from a Chinese-American organization funded by Beijing. Those are just coincidences, Schiff protested weakly. Coincidences? Kennedy let out a short laugh. Son, if these are coincidences, then I must be the Emperor of China. The only truly coincidental thing here is how every pro-China vote mysteriously makes you richer. He then produced intelligence assessments that had recently been declassified. According to FBI counterintelligence, Chinese state media has mentioned you favorably 847 times in the last 5 years, Kennedy revealed. They've mentioned me exactly 0 times. Makes you wonder why that is, doesn't it? Could it possibly be because I don't vote the way Beijing wants? Kennedy then delivered yet another surprise. You know who else is quite fascinating? He asked. Your former colleague, Senator Dianne Feinstein. Her driver for 2 decades turned out to be a Chinese spy. Both of you were aware of it. Both of you protected each other as if bound by a mutual destruction pact, except the destruction was targeted squarely at American interests. He then presented classified briefing logs. In January 2018, the FBI briefed you on Chinese influence operations right here in Congress. Then in February 2018, Senator, you voted against every single China-related security measure. By March 2018, you were publicly dismissing any concerns about China as simply xenophobic. Now, that's not what I'd call oversight. That's clearly an overlook. The pattern here was completely undeniable and frankly, quite damaging. Every anti-China bill that crossed your committee's desk was killed, while every pro-China bill got fast-tracked. You, sir, are more consistent than grits at a southern breakfast. Consistently, you've served Beijing's interests. Kennedy then pulled out yet another document. This particular one was testimony from a Chinese defector. He was a former intelligence officer. He stated, and I'll quote directly, Schiff was seen as a reliable asset for influencing American policy in China's favor. Not that he was recruited, but useful nonetheless. Even Chinese intelligence considers you their guy. That's just outrageous. Schiff began to protest. You know what's truly outrageous? Kennedy quickly cut him off. It's sending American jobs to China. It's selling off American technology to China. It's compromising American security for China, all while you're getting rich off of Chinese-connected money. He leaned back, observing Schiff almost like he was a specimen. Down in Louisiana, we have a saying that if you lie down with dogs, you're going to get up with fleas. You've been cozying up with the Chinese Communist Party, and sir, it looks like you're completely infested. Kennedy then pulled out his absolute final piece of evidence from that China folder. And here's what really makes it damning. Right after getting classified briefings about Chinese military threats, your investment portfolio shows you bought Chinese stocks. You literally placed your bets against America and for China. That's not just morally wrong. It's not just corrupt either. Honestly, that's borderline treason. The word hung heavy in the air, like a sudden thunderclap. Now, I'm not actually calling you a Chinese agent, Kennedy quickly clarified. What I am saying is that you vote like one, prophesy like one, and defend Beijing exactly like one. If it walks like a Peking duck and it quacks like a Peking duck, well, he closed the China folder with a sense of finality. You know what truly gets under my skin? American factories are shutting down because of China. American jobs are being lost because of China. American technology is being stolen by China. And through all of this, Adam Schiff just got richer, while American workers became poorer. Kennedy's voice began to rise, filled with genuine anger. You completely sold out the working families of America for some Chinese cash. You are supposedly here to represent California, not Beijing. But I suppose it's pretty tough to tell the difference when you're cashing checks from both places. He then reached for the next folder on his desk, this one labeled Media Manipulation. Speaking of selling out, let's actually talk about how you've corrupted our free press. See, a congressman who just lies is bad enough. But a congressman who manipulates the media to spread his lies? That's an entirely different kind of swamp creature. You know, Kennedy began, settling back into more of a storytelling mode. My Uncle Budrow once owned an old boat that leaked absolutely terribly. No matter how many times we patched it up, water just kept pouring in. Well, that boat was actually more watertight than your office is when it comes to leaking classified information. He opened the media folder and pulled out a stack of papers that had to be at least 6 inches thick. By my count, and I had 3 different analysts confirm this, your office was the direct source of 438 unauthorized leaks to the media. 438? That's even more leaks than my Uncle Bobby's old fishing boat had. And that thing eventually sank in Lake Pontchartrain. Kennedy started laying out the evidence in a very methodical way, just like a prosecutor building their case. But these weren't just random leaks. No, these were precisely timed, carefully planned, and designed to inflict the maximum political damage possible. You took intelligence and turned it into entertainment, classification into pure clickbait. All of a sudden, Kennedy's phone vibrated. He glanced at it, and his eyes widened with what could only be described as theatrical amusement. Well, talk about timing. Take a look at this, folks. He held his phone up for all the cameras to see. A text message just popped up, supposedly from a CNN anchor. Let me just read this to you. It says, "What exactly is my opinion supposed to be today, Adam?" The entire hearing room instantly erupted. Schiff immediately lunged for his own phone, frantically typing. "Oh, are you trying to warn them?" Kennedy asked with a hint of innocence. Too late. You see, that message wasn't actually from CNN. That came from my staff, using a spoof number. But your immediate reaction just confirmed that you regularly coordinate your talking points. So, thanks for that. Schiff's face quickly changed from pale to a deep purple. He had clearly been played like a fiddle. But we actually do have real evidence of media coordination. Kennedy pressed on. Kennedy continued, pulling up actual screenshots, like this hot mic moment from your MSNBC appearance. He played the audio, and it was Schiff's voice, thinking he was off the air. Make sure Jake gets those 3 talking points. Tapper needs to really hit them hard tonight. So you're not just leaking information to the media, Kennedy observed calmly. You're actually directing them like a conductor guides an orchestra, except the music you're creating is the very sound of journalism dying. Kennedy then pulled out some financial records, which revealed a different kind of corruption entirely. But it's not simply about controlling the narrative, he stated. It's all about profit. Speaking fees from media companies, $1.2 million over 5 years. Paid contributor contracts, another $800,000. Book deals with publishers owned by media conglomerates, $3 million. He shook his head in mock admiration. You turned intelligence work into a profit center. P.T. Barnum would be proud, except he was honest about being in the circus business. The evidence of fake news manufacturing was even more damaging. Kennedy produced side-by-side comparisons of original documents versus what Schiff presented to the media. Original email says meeting. You changed it to secret meeting, and original says discussion. You changed it to conspiracy. You edit evidence like a Hollywood script doctor, except movies are labeled fiction. Kennedy pulled out a thick binder labeled Doctored Evidence. 127 instances of altered documents, 89 cases of selectively edited transcripts, 234 misleading characterizations. You don't spin the truth. You put it in a blender and hit puree. He looked up at the press section, making eye contact with as many journalists as possible. And y'all in the media, some of you are victims. Some of you are accomplices. But you all got played by a congressman who views truth as optional and facts as flexible. Kennedy then produced what might have been his most effective prop yet, a dictionary. I brought this to help Congressman Schiff. See, there's a word in here, journalism. Definition, the activity of gathering, assessing, creating, and presenting news and information. Nowhere does it say taking dictation from Adam Schiff. The press section was notably quieter now, many journalists looking uncomfortable. But here's the real kicker, Kennedy continued, returning to the evidence. We tracked the timeline of your leaks against market movements. Every time you leaked market-sensitive information, certain people made millions in trades. Want to guess who those people were connected to? He didn't wait for an answer. Your donors, your allies, your financial network. You didn't just leak for political gain. You leaked for profit. That's not just unethical. That's criminal. Kennedy pulled out one final piece of evidence from the media folder. A compilation video of Schiff making contradictory statements to different media outlets, sometimes on the same day. To CNN you say one thing. To MSNBC another. To Fox, when you rarely appear, something completely different. You're like a chameleon, except chameleons change color for survival. You do it for ratings and profit. The video was devastating, showing Schiff contradicting himself dozens of times. You know what we call someone who tells different stories to different people in Louisiana? Kennedy asked. A liar. But I guess in California, you call it media strategy. He closed the media folder with disgust. The First Amendment guarantees a free press because democracy needs truth. You've turned the press into your personal propaganda machine. That's not just corruption of Congress. That's corruption of democracy itself. Kennedy took off his glasses and cleaned them again, a gesture that had become his signature move during the hearing. Thomas Jefferson said, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. But Jefferson assumed newspapers would tell the truth, not take dictation from Adam Schiff." He reached for the next folder, labeled Impeachment Coup. Speaking of undermining democracy, let's talk about your impeachment circus. Because if manipulating the media was bad, what you did to the Constitution was worse. It's like the difference between pickpocketing and armed robbery. Both wrong, but one's a whole lot worse. Kennedy held up the folder marked Impeachment Coup, and shook his head with theatrical sorrow. You know, when I was a boy in Louisiana, we'd sometimes play hide and seek in my grandpappy's barn. But even as children, we knew you couldn't just make up new rules in the middle of the game. Apparently, that's a lesson they don't teach at Harvard Law. He pulled out a detailed floor plan of the Capitol building and placed it on the desk with the reverence of a museum curator handling a precious artifact. This here is the Capitol basement, the Schiff, a place for classified briefings, not kangaroo courts. But you turned it into your personal star chamber. Like a Batman villain, except Batman villains usually have better plans. Kennedy pointed to specific rooms with a laser pointer he'd produced from somewhere. Behind these closed doors, you held your secret trials. Republicans locked out. Witnesses coached in private. Selective leaks to friendly media. Due process died in that basement, murdered by a congressman who forgot his oath to the Constitution. A Republican congressman from Ohio couldn't contain himself. I was locked out of those hearings. My constituents were denied representation. Order, the chairman said weakly. But Kennedy was already moving right along. But let's talk about witness coaching, shall we? Kennedy then pulled out a tablet. I've got something pretty special right here, he announced. It's a video testimony that just came in this morning from one of your star witnesses. He pressed play. A middle-aged man appeared on screen, looking both uncomfortable and determined. My name is William Taylor, the man began. I testified in the impeachment hearings. I need to clear my conscience. Congressman Schiff's staff coached me extensively. They told me exactly what to say, how to say it, and what to completely avoid. When I expressed my concerns about the truth, they simply said the truth was far less important than the narrative. I was even threatened with career destruction if I didn't comply. The hearing room absolutely exploded with noise. Even the Democrats in the room looked completely shocked. Schiff's lawyers were clearly in full-blown panic mode. That's been edited. Schiff protested desperately. Has it now? Kennedy asked mildly, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Well, here's some good news for you. Kennedy continued. Mr. Taylor is actually willing to testify under oath today, in public, unlike your secret basement trials. Kennedy then did something completely unexpected. He pulled out a pocket constitution and held it up for everyone to see. Pop quiz, Congressman Schiff. He began. Congressman Schiff. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. What exactly does it say about impeachment? Now don't Google it, even though I know that's your first instinct when you're trying to find facts. Schiff glared, but then he reluctantly began to recite. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers shall be removed from office on impeachment and conviction of treason, bribery. Stop right there! Kennedy interrupted, cutting him off. Treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors, Kennedy repeated. Now show me where it says hurt feelings, or mean tweets, or Adam Schiff simply doesn't like you. Laughter rippled through the entire gallery. You see, Kennedy continued, you didn't just break a few procedural rules. No, you violated every single precedent in American history. Let me list them out for you, he challenged. He pulled out a prepared list and immediately began reading. Precedent: the accused gets to confront their witnesses. You broke it. You broke it. Precedent: the minority party gets equal subpoena power. You broke it. You broke it. Precedent: open hearings, except for classified material. You broke it. You broke it. Precedent: due process rights. You broke it. You broke it. Precedent: presumption of innocence. You definitely thought you broke it. You definitely thought you broke it. You simply made up rules like a child playing Calvin ball, except Calvin was fictional and, well, funny. You, however, are real and dangerous. Kennedy then produced comparison charts, showing every previous impeachment process versus Schiff's version. Andrew Johnson's impeachment had more due process than yours. Nixon's near impeachment was more fair than yours. Clinton's impeachment was a model of procedural justice compared to yours. You know, you've really gone too far when Bill Clinton's impeachment looks like a fair trial by comparison. He then pulled out transcripts from those basement hearings that had recently been declassified. But here's what truly gets me, Kennedy declared. You claim to be defending democracy while, in reality, acting like a tin-pot dictator. Stalin himself would have been proud of your show trials. At least he was honest about being a tyrant. A voice from the gallery suddenly called out. What about the Constitution? Kennedy nodded approvingly at the question. Exactly the right question, he echoed. What about the Constitution? Congressman Schiff swore an oath to defend it. Instead, he used it like toilet paper in his basement bathroom court. He then turned back to Schiff, his face showing genuine anger. Now, do you know what the absolute worst part is? Kennedy asked pointedly. Real crimes are going completely uninvestigated while you chase nothing but phantoms. Real corruption goes unpunished while you conduct these political show trials. And real threats to America go unaddressed while you play your partisan games. Kennedy then pulled out one final document from the impeachment folder. This is a letter from none other than Alexander Hamilton, specifically Federalist 65. He warned about impeachment being severely abused for purely partisan purposes. He said, and I quote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." He then looked directly up at Schiff. Hamilton himself saw you coming, over 230 years ago. He warned us about politicians just like you, and we simply didn't listen. Kennedy closed the impeachment folder with a definite sense of finality. You turned a sacred constitutional tool into nothing but a political weapon. You turned due process into don't process. You turned the people's house into your own personal playhouse. He then shook his head sadly. My Mima used to say, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. You had absolute power in that basement. And you certainly proved Mima right. Kennedy then stood up, something he hadn't done during the entire hearing. You know what? I need to say something directly to the American people. He turned to face the cameras directly. What you witness here today wasn't impeachment at all. It was a coup attempt, simply dressed up in constitutional clothing. It was a partisan hit job, masquerading as principled oversight. It was everything the founders truly feared when they initially gave Congress impeachment power. He sat back down and looked at Schiff, who seemed to have shrunk into his chair. But the good news is, truth always has a way of surfacing. Like cream in milk, it inevitably rises right to the top. And today, the truth about your impeachment sham is finally coming to light. Kennedy reached for the very last folder. Just one more to go, Congressman. The grand finale, the piece de resistance, or as we say in Louisiana, the last dance at the Face du Deux. The hearing room had completely transformed over the past 2 hours. What started as a packed arena of confident Democrats and smug media had turned into a somber courtroom where truth was systematically tearing down lies. Schiff sat slumped in his chair, his expensive suit wrinkled with sweat, and his hands were visibly trembling. His team of lawyers had shrunk from 5 down to 2, as the others had quietly excused themselves during the last break. Kennedy opened the final folder with the careful precision of a surgeon getting ready for the last cut. You know, Congressman Schiff, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today. Russia lies, whistleblower coaching, donor scandals, Chinese money, media manipulation, and impeachment games. That's quite the career you've managed to build. It's like a house of cards, impressive to look at, but one breath of truth and it all just comes tumbling down. He then pulled out a document that made Schiff's remaining lawyers exchange panicked glances. Now, this here is really interesting. It's your personal financial disclosure from back in 2015. Your net worth was approximately $500,000. Not bad at all for a public servant. Now, here's your 2023 disclosure. Your net worth is approximately $4.5 million. That's an incredible 800% increase. Either you're the world's greatest investor, or public service truly pays better than we ever thought. Kennedy laid out the year-by-year financial records, creating a truly damning timeline of enrichment. Every scandal we've talked about today made you richer. Every lie you told paid you dividends. Every single betrayal of public trust came with a bonus. You're like a true corruption capitalist. You found a way to actually monetize malfeasance. Just then, something truly unexpected happened. Schiff's chief counsel stood up quite abruptly. Mr. Chairman, I need to state for the record that I can no longer possibly represent Mr. Schiff in this matter. Ethical obligations simply prevent me from continuing. The lawyer gathered his papers and walked right out, leaving Schiff visibly stunned. On live television, his very own attorney had abandoned him. Well, Kennedy drawled, when the rats start leaving the ship, you just know it's sinking. Though comparing your lawyer to a rat might be a bit unfair to rats, they usually show loyalty. The remaining lawyer whispered urgently in Schiff's ear, but Schiff pushed him away, his composure finally cracking completely. This is a setup. Schiff shouted, his voice cracking loudly. This is Trump's revenge. This is consequences. Kennedy interrupted calmly. Something you've managed to avoid your whole career. But like my grandpappy used to say, the chickens always eventually come home to roost. And Congressman, it looks like your whole farm just showed up. A Democratic congresswoman from California then stood up quite unexpectedly. I can't sit here silently anymore, she said, her voice clearly shaking. I'm from California. I've watched Adam Schiff operate for years now. Director Kennedy is absolutely right. We've enabled this corruption through our silence. I simply can't be complicit anymore. The defection from his very own party seemed to break something inside Schiff. His hands were shaking so badly that he actually knocked over his water glass. But we're not quite done, Kennedy continued, pulling out one last, final set of documents. These are criminal referrals I'll be submitting to the Department of Justice immediately following this very hearing. Let me just read out the charges. He put on his reading glasses with theatrical precision. Perjury, 17 counts. Every time you lied to Congress under oath. Leaking classified information, 23 counts, each and every one documented. Obstruction of justice, 11 counts. Hiding evidence, and witness tampering. RICO violations, 7 counts. Running a criminal enterprise right from your office. Wire fraud, 9 counts. You know, those Chinese wire transfers. Campaign finance violations, 31 counts. Ed Buck, well, he was just the beginning. The list just kept going on, with each charge backed by evidence presented during the hearing. That's 98 federal charges. Congressman, in Louisiana, we'd say you're in more trouble than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Kennedy stood up again, this time gathering up all his folders. You know, what's the saddest part of it all? You actually had potential. A Harvard education, a law degree, elected to Congress. You truly could have served honorably. Instead, you chose lies over truth, power over principle, and profit over people. He looked directly at Schiff with what could only truly be described as pity. My mama taught me to always end with something positive. So here it is then. You've provided a perfect example of exactly how not to serve in public office. Future generations will study your career as a cautionary tale. You'll certainly be remembered, just not in the way you hoped. Kennedy then delivered his final blow with a devastating display of Southern politeness. Bless your heart, Congressman Schiff. And when you find yourself sitting in a federal prison cell, which you will, perhaps then you'll finally have some time to reread that ethics thesis you wrote back at Harvard, the one all about prosecutorial integrity. You can think of it as some remedial education. The hearing room was dead silent. Schiff just sat there, completely destroyed, his career lying in ruins. With his crimes laid bare, his allies had already fled. But Kennedy wasn't done with him just yet. Mr. Chairman, Kennedy said, his voice formal, I move that this committee recommend an immediate criminal investigation into Congressman Adam Schiff, the immediate revocation of his security clearances, and an immediate ethics investigation into his conduct. When asked for all in favor, every single Republican hand shot straight up into the air. After just a moment, 3 Democratic hands went up to join them. Then it was 5, and then 7. It seemed even members of his own party couldn't bring themselves to defend the indefensible any longer. The motion carries, the chairman announced with a somber tone. As the gavel came down, Schiff made an attempt to stand up, but his legs completely gave out from under him. He actually had to be helped out of his chair by his one remaining attorney. The very man who had walked into that hearing room filled with supreme confidence was now leaving as nothing more than a broken shell. "Oh, and one more thing," Kennedy called out just as Schiff was being led away. "That accent you made fun of, that backwoods southern way of talking you mocked, well, it just ended your career. I guess slow and steady really does win the race." He then packed up his briefcase, the very same battered case he had arrived with, and got ready to leave. But before he left, he turned to face the cameras one last time, addressing the American people who were watching. "This, right here, is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when the truth finally confronts the lies. And this is what justice truly means. It's not about partisan games, and it's not about political theater, it's about actual consequences for corruption." He cracked a smile, his familiar Louisiana charm returning to his face. "And to all my constituents back home, I want to say thank you for sending this simple country lawyer all the way to Washington. You know, sometimes it really does take an outsider to come in and clean up the inside." Today was a very good day for the truth. As Kennedy walked out of the room, the gallery erupted into a wave of applause. It wasn't partisan cheering, but rather the genuine appreciation from Americans who had just watched corruption finally face real consequences. The last image seen on the cameras was of Schiff being helped into a car. His career was over, his crimes were exposed, and his entire empire had collapsed. The smooth-talking congressman from California had just been utterly destroyed by a slow-talking senator from Louisiana, who proved that wisdom beats cleverness, truth beats lies, and authentic service will beat corruption every single time. The hearing itself ended without any real fanfare. No final gavel slammed down. No one was immediately led away. Schiff simply gathered his papers, whispered something to his remaining staff, and slipped out through a side door. Kennedy packed up his own briefcase and walked right out the main entrance, stopping only briefly to answer reporters' questions with his usual noncommittal Southern politeness. Washington, D.C. doesn't really change overnight. In fact, it rarely changes at all. In the weeks that followed, the hearing generated all the predictable partisan reactions you'd expect. Conservative media outlets called it a complete demolition. Liberal outlets, on the other hand, labeled it a witch hunt. And most Americans, completely exhausted by all the political theater, simply moved on to the next crisis within a matter of days. The House Ethics Committee did open a preliminary review, which is standard procedure that could either drag on for years or just quietly disappear. The Department of Justice acknowledged they had received Kennedy's referrals by sending a simple form letter. Whether anything would actually come of them was really anyone's guess. Schiff, for his part, retained all of his committee positions. He continued to appear on the Sunday morning talk shows, though maybe a bit less frequently than before. His fundraising numbers took a dip, but they didn't completely collapse. You see, in Washington, survival is often just a matter of waiting for the next big scandal to shift everyone's attention somewhere else. But still, there were some subtle shifts happening. Younger Democrats started to distance themselves, hedging their support with careful phrases like, "Well, I don't agree with everything he's done." Donors suddenly became a lot harder to get on the phone. His speaking fees started to decrease. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, the Washington way. Kennedy eventually returned to Louisiana, where he told his supporters, "Look, I said my piece, and I showed my evidence. What happens next isn't really up to me." And when he was pressed about whether or not justice was truly served, he simply responded, "Justice in Washington is a lot like the humidity in Louisiana. You know it exists, but you can never quite seem to grab a hold of it." 6 months later, Schiff announced that he would be focusing on new opportunities after his current term was over. It wasn't a resignation, and it wasn't an admission of guilt. It was just a slow fade that so often passes for accountability in the world of politics. The media coverage of him evolved from a fierce defense to a sort of quiet abandonment. It wasn't a retraction, of course. Journalists rarely admit when they're wrong. Instead, it was more of a gradual forgetting. Schiff's name just started appearing less and less frequently. His opinions were sought out less and less often. In the end, no one went to prison. No one was ever formally censured. The system simply protected itself, just as it always does. But the transcripts of the hearing remained public record. The evidence Kennedy had presented officially became a part of the congressional record. Law students would go on to study it. Historians would one day reference it. And sometimes, that's the only victory you get, putting the truth on the record, even if real justice never actually follows. About a year later, a reporter asked Kennedy if he was ultimately satisfied with the outcome. He mentioned, "Down in Louisiana, we don't really expect alligators to suddenly become vegetarians. Instead, we simply try to stop them from eating our chickens. Occasionally, just letting them know you're observing them is enough to send them hunting somewhere else." The reporter, however, kept pushing. "So, essentially, nothing truly changed?" Kennedy just offered a wry smile. "Look, son," he explained. "In Washington, making someone irrelevant is actually the toughest punishment you can give. No one ends up in jail, but everyone here understands what's happened. That's just how things operate in this city. It's a death by reputation, not by a jury's verdict." Perhaps the most accurate insight into the situation came from an anonymous senator several years down the line. That senator stated, "Kennedy didn't really destroy Schiff during that hearing. He simply highlighted the downward spiral that had already begun. And sometimes, that's truly all it takes." The hearing simultaneously managed to change absolutely nothing and absolutely everything. It was the classic, ongoing contradiction of Washington scandals. The established system continued on. The main figures stayed put. Yet power subtly, almost unnoticeably, shifted. People's reputations quietly got re-evaluated. And so, history documented another instance where someone presented folders packed with facts within a city seemingly built on fiction. In Washington, that really counts for a lot.